When my wife and I were first married, we couldn't afford custom furniture. Really, we couldn't even afford furniture. We had a one bedroom apartment that we struggled to furnish. So that's when I decided, why not make our own furniture? And that's when I fell in love with woodworking. So in this video, I'm actually going to take you step by step and show you how you can make your very own custom end tables with some very budget friendly materials from the big box stores. Let's jump in. For this build, I'm going to be using three 1x4 by 8 foot pine boards, along with a 1x18 by 36. We call it a hobby panel. I believe that's like what Home Depot calls it. I got this from Menards. They have similar hobby panels, but they actually call this just edge glued pine board. This is much more reasonably priced than the hobby panels at Home Depot. But nonetheless, you could use one of those for this project. The tools we're going to be utilizing are pretty minimal as far as power tools go. I will be using my miter saw behind me, my table saw over there, and probably just my pin nailer. The pin nailer or brad nailer is optional. If you have some clamps, you can, and some wood glue, you can go that route. You don't necessarily need to use brad nails or pin nails. I will be utilizing the pin nailer just so that way I don't have to use clamps as often, just to kind of speed up the process a little bit. I will, throughout the whole process, have I guess a cut list, we'll call it, basically for all your parts that you're going to need for this. I will have that just kind of running over here on the side as we go through. So I'm not one who's going to charge for any plans or any process or anything like that. Feel free to save the video, screenshot the video with the parts list and everything, and reference it at any time if this is something you choose to build. So with that said, I'll shut up and get to work.
Hey guys, video editor Danny here. I ended up adding a really cool feature to this table that didn't make it into the video, so be sure to check it out on the final reveal. Sorry for the interruption.
So when I'm breaking down material, I like to start off with my larger cuts first, so that way I can ensure that I have proper material for all the parts that I need. So my first cuts here are going to be at 23 and a half, and I'm going to need 4 of those. No, correction. I'm actually going to need 8 of those. My fault. All right, next up, we're going to take we want 2 pieces at 15. And then 2 pieces at 13 and a half. Pieces I'm cutting now are the parts that are going to make up the skirt for the end table. The previous 8 parts are going to make up the legs. So if you wanted your table to be a little bit taller, a little bit shorter, you would need to modify the size of the previous 8 pieces that we cut. I had cut them at 23 and a half. If you wanted it to be taller, you'd have to make those pieces longer. But making them longer would also change the amount of material that you would need. So I was basing it off of the yield and also kind of what common end table sizes are. All right, so out of this remaining piece, we are going to need to get a few more pieces out of it. I'm going to end up needing a 2 3/4 by 3-inch piece. So I'll need a 3-inch piece, and then I'll rip it down to 2 3/4 this way. And then I'm also going to need some 3-inch pieces at 2 inches wide. However, I don't like ripping really small pieces like that on the table saw. I just don't like having my hands that close to the blade. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this remaining piece and rip the whole thing down to 2 3/4, cut my 3-inch pieces out of it, and then rip it down to 2 inches, and then cut my remaining 3-inch pieces out of that. I know it's a little bit more back and forth. It's not quite as efficient, but I would rather keep all my digits and be a little less efficient. We're going to take 4 of our 23.5 long pieces for our legs and rip them down to 2 3/4. I want my overall leg. I want the profile for whichever way you're looking at it. I want it to look like it's 3.5 inches, regardless of what way you see it. So they're going to be, like so. And looking at it like this, obviously this way is wider than 3.5 inches. It's going to be 4 1/4. Looking at it this way, so we're going to reduce this down to 2 3/4. So that way, when you look at it, it's going to be 3.5 inches, regardless. Now, up until this point, I've been using a job site contractor table saw, a small Ryobi one. It's pretty cheap, and I finally, got enough money to splurge a little bit, and I got myself this Delta. It is still technically a contractor saw, but it is a much better contractor saw, and it's much more affordable than a traditional like cabinet saw. Those things are thousands of dollars. This thing, I can't remember how much it was, but I'll throw it up here, so that way you can see how much it was. I got it from Lowe's. I also have the Lowe's credit card, and so it saved me an additional 5% on top of the sale price because it was also on sale. So at that point, I couldn't beat it. I had to splurge a little bit. So I was ready to level up my table saw game, and I finally got one. So I'm super excited. This is actually the first time I've used it, and so I've got it dialed in roughly, but these are actually the first cuts that I'm going to make on it, and so I'm actually super excited to be using it. So again, enough talking, and we're gonna get back to work. Save this. All right, so since I've already got this set up at 2 3/4, I'm gonna go ahead and make that initial rip on this, like I explained over there at the miter saw. We're gonna go ahead and rip this to the 2 3/4. Let me double check. Yes, because I'm gonna need 4 pieces at 2 3/4 by 3 inch. So I'm gonna rip this one to 2 3/4, and then we'll head back over to miter saw, and I'll get those 3-inch pieces cut. And then we'll come back over here and rip it down to 2 inches. I love that this this table saw has a brake on it, so it actually slows the blade down, instead of just waiting for the centrifugal force to finally run out. That's how my other saw is, and it seems like forever for it to actually slow down and come to a stop. So I love that this has a brake. It's a wonderful safety feature. All right, I'm gonna jump over to the miter saw real quick and chop this into my 4 3-inch pieces and come back over here and rip these down. Yeah, seeing how small these pieces are, this is exactly why I didn't want to chop these up into my 3-inch pieces ahead of time and run them on the table saw. That just not comfortable, not comfortable at all. All right, let's adjust this down to 2 inches. All right, back over to the miter saw. All right, now that our parts are all cut, we're going to move on to the assembly process. We're not going to cut the top portion just yet. I want to make sure that we get the whole base and everything assembled, and then we will make sure that our final dimensions and everything work out correctly with our top and also with our inner shelf. So I will be using wood glue. This is Tight Bond 3, and I will also be using my pin nailer. Again, you don't have to use brad nails or pin nails. If you wanted to use screws, you could. They'll be exposed. unless you decide to go the extra route and countersink them and then also cover them up with dowels, which honestly is a cool look. It actually adds for a very unique style, unique look. I like it depending on the piece. So whichever way you decide to go, it's totally up to you. Um, you don't have to use fasteners. You can go a little bit slower route and go with clamps if you have enough clamps to do the whole process. Otherwise, you may just have to do multiple glue ups at a time, and then it just may take a little bit longer. So, whatever means you have, by all means, that's too many means. Um, assemble it however works best for you. Now, if you are wanting to stain or paint this table, this would be a good time to go ahead and sand everything before it's all assembled. That way, you're not having to sand inside corners, outside corners. It makes that process a lot easier. And you can go ahead and pre-finish all those pieces as long as you steer clear of any areas that is going to get glue. Those you would just want to make sure that they are not getting any kind of finish in those areas because the glue probably isn't going to bond, especially depending on the type of finish that you're using. Got the fancy glue spreader. All right, that's 4 of those. Set those aside. Now let's move on to these little scraps right now. Those will be used a little bit later. Let's move on to our skirt, our tabletop. So we've got 2 different sizes of these. We've got 15 and 13 and a half. So that means that our 13 and a halves are going to go between our 15s. So that way it's 15-inch square. I like it. Now we're going to go ahead and get these glued up. See which sides we want facing out first. Determine that, and then get them glued up and nailed together. Glue. Good. All right. We're going to set this aside. Now, again, this is a 1 by 18 by 36 inch. So I haven't pulled an official measurement on it yet. It is a 16th, a 16th shy of 18 inches. So we'll plan for an 18 by 18 square top, which is how I kind of drew this thing up in SketchUp. If you guys don't use any kind of drafting or CAD or modeling software, I highly recommend SketchUp. I've been using it for years now. For the longest time, I used the free version. It is, cloud based, so you can. There's pros and cons to it. This is definitely not a plug for SketchUp, but uh, again, I use the cloud version of it. It's free, and it does a lot. It lets you design these basic things, so you can have basic plans to go off of. It makes doing this a whole lot easier as a hobbyist for sure. Now I've since upgraded to a paid version. I can't remember which version I have now, but there's a lot more tools when you go with the paid version, and it's local to my computer, and which there's pros and cons to that too. So, but yeah, SketchUp, I highly recommend it. There are lots of tutorials out there on SketchUp. I learned a lot of what I know on SketchUp from watching Jay Bates. I can leave a link to his channel either in the description or maybe up here. We'll figure out in editing. Yeah, another thing to learn doing this. So I learned a lot from him, just some little tips and tricks on how to use SketchUp. But yeah, SketchUp, highly recommend it. So moving on. So we're going to cut this 18 by 18. So we will measure down 18. All right, now that we're all marked out here, I'm going to go ahead and get this thing cut down. I should be able to do it with the table saw as long as I'm very careful and I keep this thing straight and I don't let it get all skewed. So yeah, wish me luck. All right, we've got our top cut down to size. Before we get too far, I want to take a couple of these scrap pieces. These are actually just the fall for when we had to rip down the legs. So these are just the extra pieces that came off of that. And so I'm actually going to use these as the nailers, basically the part that are actually going to secure the top to the skirt. So I'm going to get these cut to the right size and then get them attached to the skirt. All right, now these should fit just inside here. These don't have to be super snug. Again, these are just gonna attach the skirt to the top. And so we're gonna get these glued and pinned in here. And I'm gonna use a couple of spring clamps just to hold them in place while I glue and nail. See what we're working with. Let's see. I'm just going to make a couple marks for reference. We need to find a way to secure the skirt to the top. And we need to account for wood movement. And I actually just noticed that I'm going to have to rotate this in order for the movement to work how it's supposed to. With where our attachment points are going to be, they're going to be here. Our top is naturally going to want to expand in the width of it. So I actually need my attachment points to be along that line. So that way, when it does expand, it's allowed to do that naturally. All right, so what I'm actually going to end up doing is I'm going to end up drilling a hole here and then an oblong hole here and an oblong hole over here. And then this one will get secured with a screw just straight into the top, and it won't move. This will also get a screw, but as the top wants to move outside, expand and contract, it will allow the oblong hole will allow that wood to move around and that screw to move through that slotted hole, if that makes sense. So I'm going to do that to this one along with the other one, and we will go ahead and get this secured, and then we'll get our legs attached. All right, I'm going to be using 1.25" pocket hole screws. You can use whichever screws you like. 1.25" should be what works. I mean, we're working with 2 3/4" pieces roughly. Just don't sink them in real far, just so that way it doesn't pop through the top. And like I said, these are going to be oblong. All right, line it back up with our marks. Now, if you're using a screw gun, please just be careful. You don't want to overcrank this thing. All you need is snug. It doesn't need to be really wrenched on. And with these holes where they're oblong, just put it right in the middle. And again, just barely snug, especially with the oblong, because you want that wood to be able to expand and contract as needed. All right, now that our tabletop and everything has been secured, I'm actually going to break this down just a little bit and get everything sanded. I'm not going to make you guys watch it. I mean, sanding is sanding. It's really boring. You start with a low number, you end with a high number, and then you move on. So I'm not going to make you guys watch that. I'll start. This stuff actually isn't that rough, so I'm actually probably going to start around 120. I don't think I need to go down to 80 grit. I'm going to start with 120 on this stuff, and probably finish with 180, maybe 220. Kind of just depends on how it looks. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then I will probably end up getting out the chamfer bit on the palm router and kind of ease the edges on all of these pieces before I start the final assembly. All right, we've got our pieces all sanded. We've got our skirt reattached to the top. So now I want to go ahead and get our legs put on. Now I did go ahead and kind of mark some of these. I ended up taking the chamfer bit and I ran it around the bottom of the skirt, ran it around both the top and bottom edges of the tabletop. And then I went ahead and did the bottom of the legs. That way, if this thing were to be scooted along the floor, these things, the legs aren't going to blow out, they're not going to splinter, or they're less likely to. Get these on here. Now I will end up gluing and pinning these on here. I'm just kind of getting them placed on here just so I know that I've got everything exactly where I want it before I permanently attach them. I think that's how I want it. All right, nothing to it but to glue it, I guess. Excellent. 3 more times. Well, you know what? I just realized that I messed up. That's okay. That's how this works, right? So now we're just going to have to pivot a little bit. If this was the inside, which is where this goes, then normally this would be, flush with the bottom, and then you would, route your chamfer around it. And then our shelf would sit on this. But now we're going to have to drop it down just a little bit to where it's below the chamfer. It's not ideal, but it is what it is. And, mistakes were made, and now you just got to learn from them. So we're just going to move right along and go with this option because that's the option we have. So I'll get these things glued and pinned on the inside here, and then we will get our shelf cut to fit on the inside. All right, now let's pull our final measurement so we can cut our shelf. Yeah, so we're gonna cut this remaining piece just a hair under 15 by 15. We want this to go the same way as our top. Slide it in here. A little snug. That's all right. There we go. That's better. Yeah. Hey, would you look at that? That's not too bad. Since I've got like the top edge and the bottom side of the skirt, or that is it a skirt or apron? I've been calling it a skirt the whole time. Is it apron? I feel like it's an apron. Now that I think about it. If you guys know, let me know. Yeah, please tell me. Am I calling it the wrong thing? Anyway, since this piece is already chamfered, I think I want to actually go ahead and chamfer all of our corners I think it would just kind of continue add to the look of it. Could be a mistake, but I don't think it will be. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to go ahead and continue chamfering these. That means I got to take the top piece back off so I can get all the way back up into this area here. Otherwise, the router bit is going to run into it. I don't want that to happen. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to go ahead and chamfer the rest of this and bring you guys back when I'm all done.
Now that everything is sanded to the final grit, it is time for the wood finish. Now, I will be using the Minwax Early American Wood Stain, and then my top coat will be the Watco Lacquer Spray finish in Satin Sheen. Whichever finish you choose to go with, just be sure to pay attention to the manufacturer's directions. That way you can, one, stay safe, and two, get the result that you desire out of that finish. I'm gonna go ahead and get into staining and finishing this table so that way we can see the final product.